Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for RCP, and I'm joined now by Texas Representative Chip Roy, one of the most fiscally conservative and most consistent members of Congress. He joins us from Capitol Hill, where Republicans are scrambling to put the finishing touches on an end-of-the-year CR. Congressman, how is that work going?
Well, anytime you hear the phrase scrambling and end of the year, you should run and hide if you're an American and you care about fiscal conservatism or reduction in debt or reduction in deficits, because they never go together, right? The problem we've got here is the usual swamp way of legislating. And there's always a reason, right? There's always an excuse. Sometimes there are reasonable concerns, like the disaster situation for our friends in the Southeast, farmers who are, getting absolutely hosed by the ridiculous policies of the Biden administration, inflation, and other geopolitical forces. These are all real issues. Nobody disputes that. The dispute that I have is that, as usual, we're just writing blank checks and then piling on complicated policies on healthcare, on energy, on any number of issues, buying some votes to put together a package with what they call four corners negotiations without a whole lot of real input from those of us who have to vote on this stuff. And so, we still haven't seen the text of the bill. It's 11:10 on Tuesday. Government funding expires Friday, and I'm told it's 1,400 pages, 110 billion of unpaid for additional spending, 25 billion of healthcare spending, which is half paid for by gimmicks with complicated health policy. And so, to say I've got concerns is an understatement.
Well, you mentioned the four corners, Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and then their counterparts in the minority. I'm curious, because leadership elections are around the corner, if how Republicans handle this CR might influence your vote for Republican leadership next year. Is this something that you're going to be remembering?
Look, I'm not going to play that game. I will say this, though, because I think it matters, that something has to change, okay? We have this year passed an extraordinary amount. I don't have the total in front of me. I need to actually have my staff. I need to work it up. An extraordinary amount of money via suspension of the rules. We have moved extraordinary policy via suspension of the rules. We are doing the opposite of what we set out to do 2 years ago, to open this place up, have more amendments, have more say, have more engagement. And that has to change. So something's got to get sorted out heading into January that changes that landscape. We need to get back to legislating the proper way. I understand there are emergencies. We also have to get real about spending. When someone comes up to me and says, but fill in the blank, act of God, war, there's always a reason, right? Take Ukraine. We've got to stop Russia. This is an important moment. This is Churchill, all of that. They'll say, well, what about China and Taiwan? Or right now it's, disaster rate, hurricanes. It's farmers. It's, well, we've got this. There's always an emergency. There's always a thing. There's always a heartstring to be tugged on. There's COVID. There's a COVID emergency. Oh, now we got to make sure we do. We always have a reason to spend money because we can, because we print money and we're destroying the country. But more importantly, we're destroying the American ethos because we're making Americans more dependent on government by continuing to fund largesse and programs and doling out money. That has to stop.
Well, Congressman, I remember there was a lot of talk among Republicans about all of the things that they were going to do when they controlled both chambers of Congress as well as the White House. And certainly, I think some of your colleagues would admit that Republicans fumbled on Obamacare repeal. But one thing that I was struck by during the Biden years is that suddenly a lot of Republicans who greenlit an extraordinary amount of spending under a Republican president, suddenly they're very happy to make fiscally conservative arguments. So is this just the way of Washington? Republicans are fiscally conservative when they're in the minority, and then they forget all of that when they have control of power.
Republicans are never fiscally conservative. That's just, prove me wrong. And if anybody wants to come debate me, come prove me wrong. What will happen is an appropriator will come up and they'll give me some figures about the last decade, about how we've held non-defense spending and even defense spending, overall discretionary spending, at a relatively low clip, they will say. I will say, well, COVID kind of blew that out of the water, but I'd also point in a lot of side deals and a lot of supplemental spending. But I would also note that, I mean, the truth is, whatever fiscal discipline that has ever been enacted has been forced upon us, forced upon Republicans. When we went through in 2011 with cut, cap, and balance, that was a political effort. Senator DeMint over the Senate, some House guys, to push that and get cut, cap, and balance put in place again in divided government. Republicans in the House, Obama in the White House. And so now it'll be interesting to see with Doge. I pointed out when we had Elon and Vivek, when they came in to meet with the conference, I said, look, I love what you guys are doing. Support it. You should expose all of this. You should use crowdsourcing, use AI, whatever you can. Let's identify all the waste. Let's cut it. But if you're looking for the enemy, it's right here in this room. Okay, it's all the people who vote for this stuff all the time. And we're doing it this week, right now. Mm-hmm. We are doing what we said we wouldn't do, right? Since we were elected on November 5th, by my count, we are now pushing, you correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around $330 billion of additional deficit spending passed out of the House, certainly to be made law in the Senate. The WEP Social Security bill and the supplemental bill that we're talking about this week. I'm not even talking about any other bills. Those add up to additional deficit spending, unpaid for. They're not paid for with taxes. They're not paid for with cuts. They're just more printing of money. And Republicans said they wouldn't do that. And that's precisely what we've done in the first 45 days after the election.
So it doesn't sound like you're very optimistic that the way Congress will deal with Doge will be in a serious way. Certainly Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, they can make suggestions, but when it comes to actually, statutory authority, it doesn't seem like you're certain that Republicans will have the stomach for those kinds of reforms.
What I would tell you is two things. One, the executive branch is going to have to use every tool at their disposal, whether it's impoundment or other things, which are going to be debated some in the early part of next year, to limit spending, constrain spending, target spending where it should be. But importantly, that things are going to have to change in the House of Representatives in particular, and in the Senate too, if we expect to actually have any kind of fiscal responsibility. If I hear one more Republican come say something like, we've got to bend the mandatory spending curve. When you hear that, that is code for we're not going to do crap. What that's code for is we're going to pretend to talk about changes because they don't want to touch or talk about Social Security or Medicare. The fact that Social Security is going to go bankrupt now 6 months earlier because of the $200 billion that we just passed that is going to actually drive up the deficits and constrain Social Security and make it go bankrupt 6 months earlier. This is the kind of thing that Republicans do that has to change. So, we'll see what happens. Do I think there can be some good things next year? Yes, but only if Republicans lead, and frankly, only if the executive branch pushes Congress.
Yeah, aside from the sequester, which you mentioned, which DeMint and others were able to sort of muscle through,
right?
I can't think of a single time in the last decade where spending actually came down substantially. And even then with the sequester, I mean, we're talking about drops in the bucket. You've said numerous times that things have to change. What is the external force or, locus that would actually make Congress move, make Congress more fiscally responsible outside of a crisis, which seems as of yet now several years down the road?
Number one, anything that President Trump puts forward to push and promote fiscal responsibility and cutting waste, cutting programs, and stopping the cycle. Number two, and relatedly, whatever Elon, Vivek, and others can do to publicly promote and show what we're doing that's wrong, that's continuing to perpetuate deficit spending. But then number three, I'd say internally, the most important thing is we have to have people that are sitting at the decision table, making decisions about what we're going to do to get this right at the outset. Because we continue to get these negotiated products among leadership four corners, a handful of committee heads, none of whom at the end of the day are really focused on fiscal restraint. They're focused on solving problems or buying a vote. Again, some of it's meritorious, right? Concern about family farms shutting down is a real problem. We should address it. This government has messed up our market so bad that farmers are dying. But I'm looking at a bill that, first of all, I don't know if that money goes to family farms or corporate farms. Second of all, I don't know whether or not what I know for sure, is that we're not paying for it. And until there's a limiting principle, then we'll never see change. And I get told by some people in the conference, but Chip, this is an act of God. You don't need a limiting principle. Look, man, if we were actually running at reasonable deficits or balanced budget, go back to 2020 when we actually had a balanced budget, and the only time in my life, and you said to me, can we afford $10 billion for farmers to help them get over the hump? Sure, right? But once you go down that road, there is no limiting principle. So let me give you one last example, not to filibuster. I had a core supporter who was mad at me because I was challenging the wisdom of giving $100 billion to Ukraine. Just in my grill, chirp, chirp, chirp. This is terrible. Don't you know what Putin's doing? I'm like, of course I know what Putin's doing. Of course I don't like this for the Ukrainian people. Of course we have a role to try to stop Putin from moving, both because of the agreement in the 90s and also because it's just wrong. However, there are side impacts and effects. But you're mad at me because I won't sign off on another $100 billion. How about this? The top marginal rate will go up from 37% to 43%, the rate it was under Clinton, for the next 2 years, and we'll pay for your Ukraine war. Crickets. I haven't heard a thing about it since from this individual or frankly others when I bring it up. My point is that people are getting the free lunch. People are running around with their, give me my low taxes, and they never cut spending. Let me just give a warning shot to my colleagues. You are not getting tax cuts this next year without corresponding significant spending cuts that will reduce deficits. Let me be clear. That is going to be a fight and a hill that I will die on.
Very good. Well, Congressman, thank you for joining us in the middle of things there on Capitol Hill. We'll have to leave it there. I'm Philip Wegmann. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM, and we will be right back after this.